17th, which is Wednesday. This is the start of a whole new unit in our class called Collections Management. So we start off with readiness assurance test. So I'm going to be pointing out sections here that you want to pay attention to for the readiness assurance test. You have uploaded into Moodle right now. You have the two documents I want you to read. One is one chapter out of Running a Museum, the Practical Handbook, and the AAM National Standards and Best Practices that relate to collection management. I've also put here for you the Joseph Moore Museum's mission. That will become important. And finally, I've given you a reference document, the ICOM ethics, and I'll talk about that in this reading guide in a little bit. So the first document that you are going to take a look at is the Running a Museum, a Practical Handbook. So you're going to take a look at the contents, find Collections Management chapter by Nicola Ladkin, and go to that. And this is where we start in on our chapter. This document is a broad overview of what collections management is and what good collections and effective collections management is. So this is a great place to start, and you'll take your readiness assurance test on this, and then each day in the rest of the unit we'll be going more in depth into some component of collections management, with your final product being an assessment of your specific collection. So here we are at the beginning. Of course, it's going to place this article in context, tell you what its goal is, so pay attention to that. It sets up the whole document as usual. So here we define collections management. This entire paragraph is a definition of collections management, basically, so this is important. Also, I want to point out that they go even further by having a box here of the three key interrelated elements of collections management. Having something out in a box here is a lot like having a figure, so you want to know these three key elements, right? 1, 2, 3, controlled access. Okay. I do want to point out that they invoke the mission here about how that relates to the museum's collection, so pay close attention to that. They start talking next about a collections management policy. What is a collections management policy and how is it used? Pay attention to that in this section. This is part about the museum's mission statement. Now here's where they bring up the ICOM Code of Ethics for Museums. So going back, I told you that I've downloaded that document for you. You could also go and find the ICOM website and take a look at the document there and look at other resources that they have. This is a really nicely formatted document. It has 15 sections, which includes 8 sections and a glossary. It's only 15 pages. It's really pretty short, but it really goes through the ethical considerations for a museum. Okay, now I have not given you the ICOM to read as a requirement. Instead, I've given you something called the AAM's National Standards and Best Practices. That's the American Association of Museums. And I've just given you the collections part of that document. And that's a little closer to home than the ICOM, so that's why we're focusing on that. But I wanted you to know that there is an International Committee on Museums that you want to know about, or International Council of Museums. Let's keep moving. Okay, so here we are, there's another box, and this box talks about how to create your collections management policy. So it tells you the different components that should be in it. So you want to take a look at this, and this is something we will use in class. They're going to then go into depth on different components that are listed in this box too. So collections management procedures, registration, and some of these things you've already read a little bit about. So when you get onto the next page, they start talking about acquisitions and accessioning. You guys have already read stuff about that, an acquisition policy. You've read a little bit about this. Let's get back here. Okay. Again, now you can continue to skim through deaccessioning. You've also read about cataloging and numbering, so we're going to continue to skim. In fact, what's more interesting, I thought, was to read the boxes where they talk more about what to include in a policy, since you know a little bit about these things already. It doesn't hurt to skim because it reinforces things that you've already learned, which is a great way to build your knowledge. You'll notice other things now that you've gotten a broad view of something. You'll start to put together other pieces that you might not have been able to figure out your first time through. They're going to talk about loans. Loans is not really part of the scope of the class, so skim through this just to have an idea that museums do loans. The most relevant portion, I thought, was this section here about documentation for loans, and that it needs to be retained. This section here, the box on loans, again, this is their sort of summary takeaway of what you need to know about loans. So you might want to skim through that. It's not of great importance to me, though. They do go into a section on condition reports, and this is great because we are going to do a condition report for a specimen in your collection. So what I want you to pay attention to is, when do you usually do a collection report, a condition report, and why do you do it? What is it useful for? This is an important part of our class here. We move on, and we start talking about preservation of collections. This is a real focus for this unit, collection storage. I want you to explain why collection storage is not a dead space. Pay attention to that. What are the ideal conditions for collection storage? What kind of material should you avoid using, and why? And if you have to use them, how can you mitigate their effects? This will ring true with your experience in the collections already with lining trays, and why we might be lining trays. Think about the material that the trays are made of, and pay attention in this section to come up with an idea for why we're doing that. Okay, they start talking about, when they talk about handling and moving collections, they say to be extraordinarily careful when you're moving things and plan out your moves. Why is that? Why do you want to be so careful? Think about the nature of collections and what they're talking about there. Okay, photography. Some of this is a bit outdated, and it's also quite technical. So basically what I want you to gather from this section is, why is photography important? When do you use it? And then just know that we will connect our photos in Specify. That's what we do with our photos and how we keep them connected to our objects, basically. They have a section on insurance. You want to know what the aim of insurance is, and you can skim through much of the rest of that. So here we are skimming. Security issues, always a good idea to look at these boxes. Okay, now they start talking about, excuse me, let's get out of this. Now you know my schedule. Okay. They start talking about the difference between display collections or specimens on display and in the exhibition rooms, and specimens in the collection. So what are the threats to exhibited specimens, and how are they different than specimens that are stored off exhibit? Don't worry about packing and shipping. If you're going to pack and ship something, go ahead and look up the best standards and practices. So skim on through this part. Not worried about that. Now they get to research in collections, and this is really important for us. So I want you to pay good attention to this. Some of this, we've talked about field collecting in depth. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about research, but I want you to know some of the important components here. Destructive analysis, pay attention to that. That's something that comes up for us in our museum, and will come up more and more over time as technology changes and we can gather more information from specimens by doing such analyses. I want you to look at this, and it talks about disseminating the results of research. Why is that important? Think about the museum's mission and obligations. Okay, got through that document. Your next document that I want you to look at is the National Standards and Best Practices for U.S. Museums. This is a document of characteristics that all U.S. museums should strive for. Doesn't mean that every museum can achieve these, but it is where you try to head. So there are a number of lists in this document. I think it's a great idea to take these lists and put them in your own words, and as few words as possible. Try to use one-word statements as much as you can for each bullet point. I'm going to point out again that they are invoking the museum's mission in a bunch of places in here, so I want you to pay attention anytime we talk about a mission. They define stewardship. Definition is a good thing to know. They also talk about what effective stewardship is. We've got the museum's mission again right here. I like that a lot. I like the connection there. Now we start going into implementation, and they talk, how do you achieve effective stewardship? So they're going to point out the importance of planning and decision making. Next page. Oh goodness, here we have another time when they talk about mission, and I want to point out to you, I posted our mission on the website, so I want you to think about why does our mission include the ancient world and its people? Think about what you know about our collections and our museum and our outreach goals, and think about our mission in relation to our collections. Here we have another list. And these are important because they say the standards require that. So this is even more than a suggestion. This is a requirement. So these are important. I would go ahead and put these in your own words. The list continues on to the next page here. Okay. And then they get to this really helpful thing, this commentary here, and where they've put the characteristics of excellence in really simple words. So go back and look at what you wrote, and then look at this, and I think you will find this quite helpful. They're going to go through and explain what some of those things mean, what does know what stuff you have mean. They talk a little bit about climate control and about prioritization, which is really something all museums have to think about. As we keep going, they start talking about money and what is it that money can solve and what can't money solve, and what are the limits on a museum. This is a section I find very, very important. What are the practices about loaning collections to non-museum entities? What are the problems with loaning things to other institutions? Sorry about this. Okay. And I also wanted to point out back up here, they do talk about why a collection plan is important. So pay attention to that, since we're going to be talking a lot about collection plans or collections management plans. Okay, and one last thing about the non-museum entities. What are the reasons you might loan to a non-museum entity, and how do you decide when it's okay to do so and when it's not? The last page here has some important ethical considerations. We won't talk about this too much. Our museum is not really faced with this issue, but this is an important issue for a lot of museums, so I do want you to be aware of it. Okay. And those are your readings. If you are interested in seeing a sample of a museum collections policy, I've got one up on the screen here. So you can take a look at this one. This is the Science Museum of Minnesota. This is their policy statement on collections management. So you could go through that, and we will probably use this in class as well. Okay, good luck. Enjoy.